Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Forum Daily West. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Alberta and British Columbia send firefighters to Los Angeles to help battle the blaze. Plus, Alberta's premier returns from a weekend with President-elect Donald Trump in Florida and says we need to prepare for tariffs. And Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre outlines how Americans would be impacted by U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods. Thanks so much for joining us. Dozens of firefighters from Alberta and British Columbia will help fight wildfires in California, and the federal government is coordinating efforts with the provinces to deploy resources, according to Emergency Preparedness Minister Harjit Sajjan. In a social media post over the weekend, Sajjan said that 60 firefighters from the two provinces will be deployed as early as Monday. Alberta announced last week it was sending up to 40 wildland firefighters with more personnel, water bombers, and contracted night vision helicopters ready to deploy. Quebec said Friday it will send 2 more firefighting aircraft to California, a day after one of the province's water bombers collided with a drone while battling the fires. The total area scorched has passed 110 square kilometers. The wildfires have now killed more than 20 people and have forced 180,000 people to evacuate their homes. Negotiations between Israel and Hamas have reached a pivotal point. Hamas has been given an agreement for the release of hostages in exchange for a ceasefire in Gaza. But will Hamas take the deal? Lisa Daftari, editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk, explains.
Hamas is playing out the clock, and so is Hezbollah. So they're playing this war of attrition and saying, you know what, the more we drag this out, Israel will have to be fighting so many different fronts that they will become tired enough to give us more of our terrorists that are in Israeli prisons. And, the international community will have to play along. And at the core of this are the Israeli hostages. These are civilians. There are 7 Americans. We don't know how many of them are alive. We're estimating about half of them perhaps are alive. We don't know how many will come through on this deal or if they will keep their word. They've given a list of individuals, again, not knowing if those individuals are alive or not.
Lisa will also give us an update from the fire-ravaged Los Angeles, where she resides. Catch more of my interview with Lisa Daftari following business news. Liberals seeking to replace Justin Trudeau as party leader have begun a race to gather signatures. Appeals are now out from leadership hopefuls to collect 300 signatures from registered Liberals, including at least 100 from 3 different provinces or territories. 7 prospective leadership candidates have now forms posted on the Liberal Party website to collect the signatures they require to enter the race. Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, former central banker Mark Carney, and former BC Premier Christy Clark have each have forms up on the site. Candidates must declare by January 23rd and pay a $350,000 fee to enter that race. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly has not ruled out an energy embargo in response to Trump's promise to impose punishing 25% tariffs on Canadian products. But Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, fresh off of a weekend visit with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, says if Ottawa uses an energy embargo to combat the incoming administration's promised tariffs, it would spark a national unity crisis. Smith says oil and gas is owned by the provinces, principally Alberta, and she says, quote, "We won't stand for that."
And you should never, ever threaten something you cannot do. And I would encourage the minister to look at a map of where Line 5 goes. Line 5 comes down through Michigan to get to Sarnia. And then that feeds the bulk of the supply needed for Ontario and connects with Line 9, which feeds the bulk of the product needed for Quebec. And so if you cut off that line, you are cutting off Ontario and Quebec. So I would encourage the ministers to either understand how our integrated pipeline system works and start looking at ways that we would be able to practically respond, because there's no point in making empty threats that cannot be executed on.
Well, since this Monday, the Community Foundation is accepting applications for its spring grant programs. The organization's executive director, Charlene Davidson, says the goal of this initiative is to support charities doing important work and empower young people to create a project that has a positive impact on their community. We'll be right back with more news from Forum Daily West. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is calling for a tougher approach to the U.S. president-elect's tariff threat on Canadian goods. Singh says he wants to see Canada halt its exports of critical minerals to the U.S., including aluminum, lithium, and potash. He made the suggestion after the Alberta premier visited with Trump, which didn't suggest he would back down from 25% tariffs on all exports to the U.S. The U.S. is Canada's biggest customer for critical minerals, and Canadian exports of critical minerals were valued at $29 billion in 2023.
Going to meet with them, trying to wine and dine them is a failed approach. Donald Trump is not rational. You can't discuss a plan over a meal with him. He is a bully. And bullies understand one thing, that is strength. They also understand pain. So if he wants to pick a fight with Canada, we have to make sure it's clear that it's going to hurt Americans as well. There's going to be pain felt for not just Canadians, but also Americans. And so that's why I'm calling on my plan. We know that the United States needs our critical minerals. They're very important for the United States. So I'm calling on all political leaders to support turning off the taps on those critical minerals. Let's stop the flow of those critical minerals into the States. There's no quicker way to get Donald Trump to back away from tariffs than to shut off the tap on critical minerals, what the states need very clearly.
Meantime, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has outlined a slightly different plan by suggesting Canadian leaders should be talking to American workers. He explains how Americans would be impacted by U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods.
We need a prime minister who can make the case to our economic allies on the ground in America. We should go to the American workers in the Midwest and their union and business leaders and say, how many jobs are you prepared to lose by hitting Canadian energy with tariffs? Energy that we sell to America at discounts that create six-figure jobs for American workers. How many of those people will go out of work? How many of those hard hats will be laid down and boots will be unfilled because Americans will lose jobs due to that self-harm?
The U.S. tariffs stand to impact our country's GDP and further aggravate Canada's skyrocketing stagflation. That is according to Stephen Johnston, director of Omnigence Asset Management. He sat down with BCN's Naveen Day to explain stagflation and highlight Canadian industries that will actually thrive amid the tariffs.
What is stagflation? Stagflation is pressure on the middle class, increasing inflation, and below-trend growth. And so there are industries, regardless of those conditions in Canada, that still experience actually good growth rates. And I'll give you an example. Think about auto maintenance, right? Because during normal times of high growth, low inflation, and a robust middle-class demand, people tend to own their cars for a shorter period of time. But conversely, during stagflation, what you tend to see is the average ownership period for a car goes out much, much longer. And of course, what happens as cars get older, they consume more auto maintenance, right? And so it's kind of counterintuitive, but during stagflation and poor economic growth, you might find the auto maintenance sector experiences growth at a multiple of GDP. Like it grows much more quickly. Another one that's more of a holistic thing to invest in is farmland. Because Canadian farmland, our biggest export market is in the United States. It's the Middle East and Asia. So first of all, you're not really subject to those tariff risks. But farmland, of course, hedges recessions really well because the demand for food is inelastic. During a recession, people don't don't change their food consumption behavior, right? So it hedges recessions really well, and it hedges inflation really well because it's a non-depreciating real asset.
That was Stephen Johnston, Director of Omnigence Asset Management. Stephen, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks. It was good to be on again.
And for Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
If you wish to hear more from Stephen Johnston, head on over to our website to watch the full interview online. Recapping one of our top stories, at least 60 firefighters from Alberta and British Columbia will help fight wildfires in California, and the federal government is coordinating efforts with the provinces to deploy resources, according to Emergency Preparedness Minister Harjit Sajjan. Alberta announced last week it will also be getting water bombers and contracted night vision helicopters ready to deploy. The total area scorched has passed 110 square kilometers. The wildfires have now killed more than 20 people and have forced 180,000 people to evacuate their homes. When we return, we'll have more of the top stories from the West with Forum Daily West. On Friday, hundreds of supporters gathered at the Lethbridge Courthouse to witness the fates of two men who were avid participants of the Coutts border blockade in 2022. Marco Van Hugenbos and George Jansen were found guilty of mischief over $5,000 and sentenced to 120 days in prison and 90 days conditional, respectively, in a case followed by many across Canada. BCN's Landon Hickok has more in-depth details on the judge's decision.
The Lethbridge Courthouse was the site of where two men were sentenced for their roles at the Coutts border blockade in 2022. Marco Van Hugenbos and George Jansen were found guilty of mischief over $5,000 for their roles, and a third man, Alex Van Herk, has been given 30 days to seek new counsel after letting go of his previous defense lawyer. Now, Van Hugenbos and Jansen each carried out their pre-court duties differently. Marco Van Hugenbos has refused to take what's called a pre-sentencing report, which determines one's personal information, beliefs, and daily lives to determine a proper sentencing for the judge to consider. Jansen, however, has completed his PSR, and the court has gone back saying his results were positive. On Thursday, the first day of the sentencing hearing, George Jansen apologized to the court for his role at the Coutts border blockade, in a quote saying, "Our actions, well intended to voice our concerns on important issues, adversely affected the daily lives of many in Milk River and Coutts." Van Hugenbos, on the other hand, has not shown any remorse. Van Hugenbos has been sentenced 120 days by Justice Keith Yamuchi for his leadership role at the Coutts border blockade, claiming incarceration will provide a real deterrent effect. He also added that his moral culpability was a mitigating factor and compared his case to that of Anthony Olenek and Chris Carbert's sentences for mischief, where they got 6 months concurrent on top of their weapons charge of 6 years. Jansen has been handed a 90-day conditional sentence in which he can serve with 100 hours of community service. Justice Yamuchi states that he is, quote, well on the way to rehabilitation after recognizing the, quote, wrongs that he committed. No house arrest has been issued, confirmed by his lawyer later, but he is banned from visiting the towns of Coutts and Milk River.
Well, we're very pleased with the outcome in one way. We're pleased that Mr. Jansen avoided a sentence of actual imprisonment. We're pleased that he received a conditional sentence of a short duration. And we're also pleased that in this case, and it's something I haven't seen in my career at least, that Mr. Jansen did not receive any house arrest. He didn't receive a curfew. And we think that's a very good outcome for him.
The sentence is the sentence. There is a range that this justice had. A range that hasn't been set in Alberta. So he's not got any guiding precedent. And so I think what he is saying is he's joining up with his colleague, Justice Lebrens, and his colleague on yet a lower court, Justice Krenke, and saying, this is what we're doing in Alberta.
The Crown, led by prosecutor Stephen Johnson, were seeking 9-month and 6-month sentences for Van Hugenbos and Jansen respectively, arguing that their political motivations were an aggravating factor. The justice countered back, saying that their suggestions were overreaching. Jeanette?
Thanks so much, Landon. Well, Lethbridge police are reminding the public that new photo radar stations across various zones in the city are now active. 42 new stations across school, playground, and construction zones have been implemented. This comes after the province announced they are shutting down all photo radar stations on all provincial roads and leaving the decision of photo radar to the municipalities in specific zones.
Effective today, there are several new sites, photo radar sites within the city, specifically around school and playground zones. We still feel that, it's our responsibility and, to protect, those vulnerable people. Typically are younger kids in, school and playground zones where they're sometimes at higher risk.
LPS reminds drivers to please continue to drive with caution in those areas. Education support workers have begun job action in Edmonton, seeking better wages from 2 public school divisions. The Canadian Union of Public Employees says some 3,000 staff with the Edmonton Public School Board and Sturgeon Public School Division are off the job. Just north of the provincial capital, another 200 workers are taking rotation strike action and working to rule. The school support workers on strike include education assistants, cafeteria workers, and administration staff. That is your Forum Daily West report. I'm Jeanette Roche. Thanks so much for watching.